Okay, today we begin a new topic. We're going to try and hit 2 or 3 topics today. And the concepts that we're dealing with are Tohen and Lash. And these are 2 of the melachot, which are next steps of things that we've been talking about. We've been talking about all the melachot that lead up to baking or making bread, including going from plowing the field, planting the seed, cutting it down, and so on. So 2 of the later stage actions, melachot, that we can take that are problematic, that you can't take on Shabbat, are grinding, tochen, which means to take the grains and pound them into a fine flour, and then lash, which means to knead it into dough, K-N-E-A-D, which basically what we do is we take that crushed flour, right now it becomes flour, you mix it with water, and now, since it's mixed with water, what does it become? It becomes dough. Then you could shape it and make it into bread, right? That's how we make bread. Everybody knows that, I think. Okay. It says the following thing. So what am I not allowed to do? Just to go back, right? So let's talk about tochen. Tochen means grinding, right? So in order to make flour, what do they end up doing? They take the wheat and they grind it into a very fine powder. And that would be the melacha that's forbidden on the Torah. So I can't make flour. Right now, most of us do not make flour, and it's therefore not going to be on that level super practical. However, if you happen to have wheat or grain in your house and you're trying to pound it into flour with a mortar and pestle or some other grinding machine, you can't do that, right? However, there's another area where there's an extension which becomes much more practical and much more common for us city folk, where it comes into play. So although the original melacha is tochen, which means to grind things into powder, which I'm not going to say there aren't examples where we do grind things into powder. There are, and we can't do them. So let's talk about what we can't do. Okay, so so the big extension that the rabbis make that becomes a problem is to take vegetables and to cut them up, to chop them up into very small parts. They look at that as similar to grinding, because what is grinding? You're taking the piece of wheat and you're breaking it into little pieces of wheat. So basically they're saying that if you do the same thing for a vegetable, to take the vegetable and chop it into fine bits, that is a problem on Shabbat. He says this applies whether it's a cooked vegetable or not. He says, when does this apply? He says, only if you're cutting it up for a later time. Right? But if you're cutting it up in order to eat it now, then it's not a problem, right? So let's say I'm taking celery, right? Celery comes in these long sticks, right? And I want to take a knife and go break it up into little bits, right? I can't do that if I'm doing that for later. If I'm doing it right now to eat it right in this meal, right, when we're going to talk about what right now means, if I'm doing it for right now, I could do it, but otherwise I can't. So to just chop vegetables up is a problem and can't be done. So we have to be careful. Right? We have to, if we're cutting our vegetables into small bits. Now, this is not talking about breaking into 2 or cutting into 3 or 4 pieces. It's talking about like really chopping it up, what we might call mincing it. So that would be where it's a problem. Okay, now, how much is right away? So like we said in Borer, right away means right up into before the Seudah. So what does that mean? Either in the meal itself or kind of as you're bringing the food to the table. And in fact, he says in the book here, he says if you're going to cut a salad on Shabbat, they should wait to do this aspect of the cutting until after people left shul, right? Meaning like, in our version, 11, well, it depends if you stay for the class or not, but 11:15, right? Like, in other words, he's saying that the woman, if they're cutting salad up into fine bits, they should not cut the salad until the last step before the meal, because of this halacha of not doing tochen, of not cutting things up into fine bits. So that's a big chidush for a lot of people. Most people don't know that. So yeah, Abi, go ahead.
So if you're going to cut a cute, you know how you.
So hold on, I'm not hearing the sound. So if you to just cut it, like to cut it into slices, is not a problem, right? I'm not talking about the slices. I'm talking about to cut into bits, right? So what are bits? Like little cubes or things like that, which they do.
Style. Israeli,
What?
like Israeli salad.
Like Israeli salad, right? Israeli salad already is I would say that's pretty, I mean, some people do bigger Israeli salad and maybe it's not, but like the little ones, yeah, that would definitely be a problem. To cut it into small little bits is a problem. To cut it into slices, not a problem. We're going to see some other cases. Okay. You're allowed, now, I just said cutting it up, but what are some cases that people like to do? People like to mash a banana or to make guacamole, right? Where you smash it down. That's not a problem. It's not about the mashing because it's not cutting it into pieces. It's only a problem when you're cutting it into pieces. So to make, to smash a banana for the baby or to take avocado and turn it into guacamole, okay. However, there are opinions that say guacamole is a problem. And if it's a problem, then you should make the guacamole right before, right? So if you want to cover all opinions, if you're making guacamole, you make it last minute, right? Which anyway is a good idea for guacamole because it goes bad if you don't, it starts getting all brown and whatever else. So it's always better to do that anyway. But anyway, okay. Now, what about bread, right? Can you cut it up or break it up into small pieces? And the answer is yes, for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're doing it with your hands, this is not a problem. This is only a problem if you're using a utensil. So that's number one. Number two, bread is not a problem because bread is a product that was already cut up. It was already, Tohen already happened to it. When did it happen to it? When you turned it into flour in the first place, right? It's before it became dough and then it became bread. So this doesn't apply on an object that already had this done, right? So there's no tochen ahar tochen, doing grinding after grinding. So too, this doesn't apply on meat or fish or something like that, or some kind of man-made product. It only applies on something that grew from the ground, right? So this idea of grinding being a problem is only a problem if it grew from the ground. But if it didn't grow from the ground, it's not a problem. However, he says that after I just said that, he says you shouldn't grate cheese. And again, but why shouldn't I grate cheese? He says there because you're using a utensil for the grater. And he says for that, he says if you're using a utensil for grating, whether cheese or carrots or something like that, even right away you shouldn't do, right? So the grating, any grating that has to get done, G-R-A-T-E, G-R-A-T-I-N-G, any grating should be done from before Shabbat, not on Shabbat. Okay, that's the grinding halachot. There's probably more we could talk about, but I'm going to stop there. The only other area that I would say is significant is where it comes into play, and I believe it's allowed, is salt and pepper shakers. A lot of times you have the one that goes like this, So usually it's already ground to a certain degree, and so then it's not a problem. But if it's like really large pieces and you're first grinding it, it could be a problem. So just something to keep in mind. Okay. Okay, now we're going to talk about making dough, right? So the basic rule of making dough that's permitted, which is forbidden, is called kneading, right? And kneading is K-N-E-A-D-I-N-G, right? Kneading is basically to take flour and mix in water. And when you mix in water and you stir it, right, it goes from being a powder, right, to being, more of a, dough, right, which is, more of a congealed substance or whatever it may be. So that's what's forbidden to do on Shabbat. So you can't make dough on Shabbat. So I mean, that's an easy one. People do make dough at other times, right? Many people make bread or other baked goods. So you may not make dough on Shabbat. So that's a big one. It's a melacha from the Torah. So people should not take flour and put water into it, put it into water, and know that it's going to turn into a dough. Whether you're cooking it or even children like to use Play-Doh or clay or something like that. You can't make that on Shabbat. Okay. Good. Now,
the kids could play with Play-Doh on Shabbat.
they could play with the Play-Doh, but you can't make it from scratch, right? Like, if you're adventurous, as sometimes we are, we like to make our own Play-Doh, right? But you can't make it on Shabbat because you can't make dough on Shabbat.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, what are some extensions that might be concerns, right? So one extension that could be a concern is to, which we don't really do. Usually we buy it out of the container, but is to make mayonnaise, right? Mayonnaise involves eggs and oil and mustard seeds and so on. It's allowed. It's allowed to make mayonnaise on Shabbat. No problem. Another thing that gets made on Shabbat is tahina. So if it's tahina, if it's pre-made and there's a powder, right? So so for regular tahina, make it fresh is not a problem because you're crushing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, let's say you bought a powder from the store, right? And then it's an add water powder and you stir it, right? And tahina is kind of, you could look at it like it's a dough. It's not a problem. You're allowed to make tahina. It's not an issue. What you should not do, that is a problem and is like this, is to make pudding or jello, right? If you're going to make pudding or jello, right, which is usually a powder that you add water to, those you should make before Shabbat. You should add the water to the powder from before Shabbat, and then it'll congeal on Shabbat. Then you could eat it on Shabbat as long as you did the action. You started it from before Shabbat. It's not a problem. But you can't do any of the pouring in the water or mixing or stirring while it's on Shabbat. Okay? That's that. Any questions so far? Great. Let's move on. Next, what about salting things, right? So this is like cooking and other places where we use salt in order to prepare food not adding salt for taste, but actually using the salt for its chemical properties. And salt does a couple of different things. Salt warms food if you use a lot of it. Salt preserves food if you use a lot of it. Salt can pickle food if you use a lot of it. So we're going to talk about all those things. So hakovesh kevashim asur mishum mivashel. You're not allowed to pickle on Shabbat, right? Meaning to start the process of pickling. I don't mean to eat pickles. You can eat pickles, but you can't start, putting salt in the water and then the food in the salt. You can't do that on Shabbat. You can't salt these things with, to create pickles. Even if you're going to eat it that meal or later that day, you're not allowed to do it. Just reading what else he wants to say here. Right, but again, as we've said, to add salt onto something for its taste is not a problem. So the problem is when you're using salt to have some kind of chemical reaction to change the nature of the food. Okay, so we don't really do that. So I'm not going to talk about that. Okay. Yeah, I mean, to make a salad with pickles is no problem. Just going through the different halachot that he has here. He says there's no problem if you're making a salad and it has tomatoes or things like that, no problem to add salt or lemon or anything like that. It's not a problem. You're allowed to salt eggs because eggs don't get pickled or anything like that. But when salting eggs, you should do it for that meal. You're allowed to, when we said salt is not allowed, sugar is allowed, right? So you're allowed to put a lot of sugar for making the food. So sugar doesn't do the same thing as salt does. You can't salt meat, right? So we don't really do this too often anymore, right? But because usually our meat is bought salted. But if you have meat that you need to take the blood out of, you can't salt it on Shabbat. Okay. Yeah. Let's say you have a salted item, right? Like a salty fish or something like that, and you want to wash it off. That's not a problem either. So that's okay. So all of that is the food preparation. So really that's where I know it's a little early, but I'm gonna stop here today because we kind of wrapped up the food preparation and the melachot. And starting on Monday, we're gonna talk about a whole new topic, which is very, very common and very frequent. And that's gonna take us for a while. And that is the use of electric on Shabbat. Different types of electric types of utensils, and using products that are electric on Shabbat. It's a big topic. It's going to go for a while. It's very common for us because we have all sorts of questions about the use of electricity on Shabbat, when we can, when we can't, and so on and so forth. It comes into our lives very, very frequently. So we're going to talk about that starting on Monday. But I'm going to stop here for today because we kind of exhausted it, unless anyone has any questions or topics that they want to get to here. Okay.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Okay, we're going to pray in about 8 minutes.
Okay.
Take care, guys. Shabbat shalom.
I'm going to leave it on, but